All right, welcome to the 5th installment of the Corona conduit bending videos here at MSU-Northern. We're going to use the Greenlee 855 Smart Bender, the electric bender, for bending conduit. And this is a really kind of a fairly technical bender that we've got different pendants that we use to control the unit. And there's some various things that we need to do in order to make this bender function properly. Like when we plug the pendant in, we need to plug the pendant in prior to energizing the bender. And we'll go through that as we see it. It's a very heavy piece of equipment, and it's got a lot of pinch points. There's various things that we do with this support puller and the cam, that when we're bending the 1.5" and the 2" conduit, that those have to be in place in order to bend that, and it's actually dangerous. So I would recommend that you wear gloves and safety glasses and think about what it is that you're doing, so that way you can operate the unit safely and be able to operate it later, so that way you're not injured and whatnot. Now, the unit itself here, you can see the on-off switch is here. It's a powered unit, and so we've got it plugged in. It's 20 amps, so we need a 20 amp plug-in for this unit, because it just requires that. The on-off switch is on this side, and we've got some switches that are on the unit here, rotary dials, that one is for the conduit size from 2", 1.5", 1.25", 1 inch, 3/4, and 1/2 inch. And there's also the conduit type, whether it's EMT, IMC, rigid, aluminum conduit, or the PVC coated conduit. And so here you'll see is where we plug in the pendant. So we have two different styles of pendants. The standard pendant basically has bend, jog, unload, angle select up, angle select down, and clear. And this is a standard pendant that comes with the unit when you purchase it. There's also a deluxe pendant, and the deluxe pendant is optional and is separate. And it will basically tell us what our measurements are. Instead of like with the standard pendant, we use the charts in the manual to figure out where to put our bending marks. That when we put in the size, type of conduit, and the type of bend that we're going to do with the deluxe pendant, it will actually give us measurements, readouts on here in order to tell us where to put the bending marks on the conduit. So we'll start off with the standard pendant, and we have to plug this in. And so you want to make sure that the pins on the standard pendant, there's 4 of them down there, and you can kind of see that. And then they line up with the holes that are down here in a crescent shape down at the bottom, and there's a clip that's here in order to push, to remove it, and to install it. So the standard pendant is now in there. There's a magnet on the back side, so you can attach it to the bender and leave it set there, and it'll hopefully stay there as long as you're not moving around and getting too rough with it. So we've got the standard pendant put in, so we can actually fire this baby up if we wanted to. And you'll see that it says H on there for home. So the bender needs to be in a home position. We've got 2 different colored shoes, or the hooks on the shoes here, and you'll notice that this top one is green, and you can't really see the label that well, but it's IMC and rigid, 1.5" and 2" for this side of the shoe. And for this side of the shoe where the silver hook is at, it's for the 1.5" and 2" EMT. And so we're going to bend EMT today, so we need to find the home position that the standard pendant's asking for. So what we do is we bend it let's put it into unload, and we'll go to about the 5 o'clock position. So I'm hitting unload, and I'm holding it, and it's in about the 5 o'clock position. Now when I hit bend, it's going to go past 6 o'clock, and then it's going to start reading degrees. And so you start seeing it starting to read degrees. Once it starts reading degrees, then I can stop, and then I can hit unload, and it will stop automatically in the home position where we put our conduit. So I'll hit unload, hold it, and it stopped automatically. Now the bender is in the home position, so that way we can bend conduit. One of the things that we have to take into consideration is, what are we bending? So with these rotary dials, I've got EMT, and I'm going to bend 2-inch conduit. So it's lined up with the 2-inch EMT for the standard pennant. With the deluxe pennant, we don't need to concern ourselves with these rotary dials. The deluxe pennant will automatically sense what it is that we're doing once we start putting in the size and the type of the conduit and whatnot. So we won't need to, they can be in any position with the deluxe pennant. So we want to set up for the bend. And there's some things about the bender that maybe we should discuss before we do that. This side here is for the 1.5 and 2-inch rigid and EMT, or IMC, intermediate metal conduit. This side, on the back side, here is for 1/2 inch, 3/4, 1 inch, 1.25 inch EMT and rigid. You'll notice that the hooks of the shoes are the green color for the IMC and rigid, and the silver for the EMT. Some of the things about this side is that there is a roller, a support roller. The conduit, as it's going through the bend, that this will be placed underneath the conduit, so that way it keeps it level with the parallel with the floor, and keeps it so that way it'll slide along. On this side, for the 1.5 and 2-inch, there is this support roller mechanism that's used for the 1.5 and 2-inch EMT. And it says right here on this chart, insert the conduit. And it'll tell us, press the unload until the shoe hook from the type and size of conduit selected at the bottom 5 o'clock position. If the pennant displays H for home, press bend until the display starts counting degrees, and then press the unload and hold it until the shoe returns and stops at the load position or the home position. Now it says insert the conduit and align the bending marks with the front of the hook of the shoe. Note, if you are bending 1.5 or 2-inch EMT, IMC, or aluminum rigid, bring the support rollers to the conduit with the roller support handle until it locks in place. Note, on the 1.5 and 2-inch aluminum rigid, set the squeeze to the minimum position. So these rollers, these support rollers here, will be used for the 1.5 and the 2-inch. And you'll notice on the side of the unit it says squeeze. So when we're dealing with the aluminum rigid, they want the squeeze in the minimum position. So we would rotate this till it pulls out, and then we can move that back and forth to the minimum positions for the rollers. You notice how the rollers are moving? See that? Well, we can generally keep this in the position where it comes from the factory for the EMT and the IMC and the rigid. So I'm going to set that back to its normal position again, but with the aluminum rigid, we want to adjust it for the squeeze. So that way it doesn't pinch the conduit so much that it just kind of deforms it almost if you don't have it in the proper squeeze position. Notice on the frame down here on the bottom that there's this tool. It's a hex key, Allen key, and what it's used for is for these levelers. And we can set this bender up with these levelers on the floor so that way it won't move around so much. And if you prefer to have the unit level, so that way when you're doing your bends, then you can set this on an uneven floor or area and level it to where it's at 0 degrees or whatever. So we're just going to put these down on the deck so that way the bender isn't going to roll around and move around us a whole bunch on us when we're doing these bends. So we're getting this thing level, and one of the unique things about this 855 smart bender is that you can bend it where the conduit and the shoes are in the vertical position, but if you might have noticed in some of the other videos that we did, or maybe you personally experienced it where you have a stub up and then you want to bend an offset or a different angle on the conduit, it might strike the floor while you're trying to bend it. So you got to find a loading dock to hang it over, or you got to elevate it with some blocking and whatnot in order to get it. Well, with this unit, it has a tabletop position. If you'll notice, there's a dial here, there's a pin that goes in the side of the unit. And you need to take this all the way forward, and we can rotate this back and forth, and we can pull this back. That we want to concern ourselves with is the pendant inside here and where the unit plugs in here, that these cables aren't going to get bent or caught up in the side of the unit while we're moving it from one position to another. So I've got it set up where it's like the 1/2 inch to 1.25 inch shoes are on this side. But let's move it to the other direction. Now notice where the on-off switch is at, it's got a guard on it. And if I'm not careful, when I'm moving this into that position, it could strike my knuckles or my fingers, and that would hurt. I've done it before, and so I like to wear gloves when I'm working with this unit. Now in order to keep this in this tabletop position, we need to move this roller back on this pin so that way it's all the way back and it's locked in position. And we can bend the conduit in the tabletop position, the 2 inch on this side, 1.5 inch. Now notice we've got here some lifting eyes. On both sides of the unit are these lifting eyes. And if you want to transport this unit, this 855 bender, to a different story on a building. Maybe you're building a skyscraper, you're building a 3, 5, 6 story hospital or some kind of building, and you bring in this unit to bend conduit, moving it around on the job site. You can use these lifting eyes, get a sling and set it up. This needs to be transported in this position, the tabletop position, with the 1.5 inch and 2 inch shoes facing up in this position for the center of gravity and maintaining its stability when you're transporting it. We do have some charts here that are just like basically in the manual. And so if we wanted to do a stub up, it says that for EMT, for 2 inch conduit, that the minimum stub is 18 3/8. The deduct for that would be 16 3/8. If we were bending IMC or rigid, it would be 16 1/8 for the deduct, and the minimum stub would be 18 1/8. So it gives us a chart here. Notice on the bottom of this chart it says offset X. On this chart and in the manuals, it talks about length minus X in order to do the offset. You got place your bending mark, you got the start of the bend here, and then there's an X value. So we need to know these values when we get ready to bend the conduit, if we're going to bend an offset, if we're going to bend a stub up, and whatnot. Know that we should have as much sticking out from the edge of the shoe as the diameter of the pipe. And the reason why we want to have that sticking out, the diameter of the pipe distance, is so that way it doesn't flatten or squash the conduit when you're bending it, or oblate it, you might say, in an oval position. If you only have for 2-inch EMT, if you only had 1 inch, it might, the forces when you're bending it, it might flatten out the diameter of the pipe and it won't fit into your couplings or your connectors, etc. So we want to take that into consideration. That's why when the deduct was 16 3/8 and the minimum stub length was 18 3/8, 18 3/8 minus 16 3/8 is 2 inches for that. So we want to set this thing up so that way we can bend, maybe let's bend a stub up and an offset in a piece of 2-inch EMT conduit. All right, so we want to bend a 2-inch EMT conduit with the 855 Smart Bender from Greenlee. And we need to use the manual in order to find the right dimensions on where we're going to put our bending marks. The information is also on the bender as well. In the chart for bending EMT conduit, it says to deduct 16 3/8 and the minimum stub length is 18 3/8. So we've got a deduct for the stub up on the 2-inch EMT at 16 3/8 and we want a 24-inch stub up. So we mark the conduit 24 inches and measure back 16 3/8, or we can just subtract it and figure out that it's 7 5/8 from the end of the conduit to our first bending mark. So we want to bend the stub up, and then after we get done with the stub up, then we're going to set the conduit out, and then we're going to find our bending marks of where we want to put the first and the second bending marks for our offset. Okay, so here we are at the 855 Greenlee Smart Bender, and we wanted to just reiterate the fact that we had to make sure that these rotary dials for the conduit size, 2-inch, and that it's EMT conduit, so that these rotary dials are in the right position, and that the pendant is plugged in prior to us actually turning the unit on. So we make sure that the pendant's in, and then we can turn the unit on. Now, the conduit I've got kind of basically set up so that way we can look at it. Now these roller supports are here and we're going to need to close these down. We also want to make sure that the line that we put that was 7 5/8 inches from the front of the goes to the front of the hook of the shoe. So basically I'm going to pull it out. I'm going to slide it in, and I'm going to try to set it up so that way the line is lined up with the front of the hook of the shoe. And you can see that right there where it's lined up. Okay, so I'm going to relax that back down again. Now, this is where I've pinched my fingers on these support rollers before. I like to wear gloves when I'm dealing with this because you're dealing with this cam that's going to go up against the handle here. And so when we run this and bring this home, I'm going to pull this up, the conduit, I'm pulling it up so that way the rollers will come. And now I can set that back down again, and I need to make sure that that cam is all the way down up against that handle. So the roller support's in there. So are we still lined up with the front of the hook of the shoe? Now the safety glass, yes sir. One of the things that we need to concern ourselves with this smart bender is you'll notice, look how much slack we've got from where the conduit rests up against the hook of the shoe and where it's resting in rested state up against the rollers is fairly significant. And when I go to bend this, that if I leave it in this position, by the time that hook slams up against the bottom of the conduit, it has made the roller assembly undo itself. So what I like to do is, I like to bend the conduit, and I hold the conduit up against the hook of the shoe, and then I start bending what it is that I need to bend. Now, we need to set up the bender. Previously, we set it at the home position, where you unbend or unload to the 5 o'clock position. From the 5 o'clock position, you start hitting bend, and as it comes around past 6 o'clock and starts reading degrees, we stop. And then we put it in unload position, and it comes back to home. And this is where we want to start the bend, is at home, in this position. So we're ready to put our angles in there. Now we're going to bend a 90-degree stub up. So I've got angle select. And as I push that, it's at home. And now as I hit the angle select, maybe it's going to tell me that I need to find home first. Okay, it's in the 5 o'clock position. I hit unload. I'm going to hit bend. It's going to start reading degrees. So then I can go to unload again, and it'll stop at home. There, it stopped. It's at home. Okay, so let's try this again. Lined up with the front of the hook of the shoe. Okay, we're in position finally. So I want to bend angle select, and I want to go to 90 degrees. You can see it starts going 5, 10, 15, 75. There's 90 degrees. Now the smart bender will set up for spring back automatically. We won't need to add extra for the spring back. It will actually bend it past a little bit 90, and then when it relaxes, it should be at 90. So we've got our angle select, 90 degrees. So one of the things that you want to make sure of is that you hold the bend button down and keep it held down the whole way through the bend. It will automatically stop whatever angle you want to put it at. If you stop and release the bend button and then try to hit it again, then you're in jog mode, and it jogs at a ½ a degree per each time you push it. And so good luck with that, right? So just make sure you hold the bend button down the whole way. Now, I'm going to lift this up so that way it's up against the hook of the shoe, and I'm going to start bending. So I'm going to hit bend. And I can release it now. And you'll notice that it went past 90 a little bit. And when I hit unload, and it should go all the way back to home. Okay? Now, this is where you want to be careful, because this cam is on a spring, and when you undo the roller, it's going to come down and it'll pinch your finger. That had happened to me. Okay, so we have our 90-degree stub up, and let's measure and see if it's actually 24. And we can check the measurement, and it is right on the nut. Well, 24 1/16. So we're pretty close to what we need. Okay, so we want to set this up now for the offset, which is 38 inches back to where the obstruction's at. Okay, so I've got a reference pipe here to go on the back side of the stub up. And you'll notice that we're going to have a problem when I get ready to bend this conduit because I'm in the radius of the bend for this measurement. But we're going to try it and see how it works. So the first mark was at 6.5 and the next mark was at 30.5. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to mark this conduit all the way around. So that way I can see it, whatever position it's in on the bender, that I'll be able to see where that mark is at. This makes it easier to see when you're rotating it to 180 degrees and whatnot. Okay, so we're getting set up for the bend. Put my safety glasses on. Now we want to set this thing up, and so we're going to want the offset that this is going to go up and that's going to go down. So I'm going to set this in the bender, and I'm wondering if that's in the home position. So I'm just going to check and see if it's in the home position. I'm going to hit unload again. Now it's in the home position. It automatically stopped. And I'm going to clear the degrees that we had for our stub up. And I'm going to set this conduit in to the bender. In where the hook of the shoe, and I want to align that up. See, and I don't think I can do this. Okay, so that's fairly well lined up. Can I get this closed to where it's in there? And I want to make sure that this thing isn't going to be dog-legged and it's going to fit in the roller okay. And I'm going to lift that up just to see how close I am with that radius, with that mark of that shoe. And I'm going to hold this conduit up, and so that way it's the rollers, it'll snug into that. And I'm going to put the bend angle at 30 degrees. So there's 10, 15, 20, 40, 30 degrees. And let's hit bend. And it automatically stopped at 30 degrees. So we'll hit unload. And notice how the unit stops before it actually hits the rollers, before the hook hits the rollers. It's not in the home position yet, but I'm going to take that out. Careful with that, slamming that down, and push this through, and I got this is going to work out. Notice how the stub up hits the floor down here. So we're going to probably need to put this unit in the tabletop position so that way we can finish the bend. So I'll go ahead and move this, and we'll rotate it around. So that way it's in that position. I need to turn that towards the unit, pull this back, and then rotate this around to where it's in the tabletop position, and then spin that back so that way it's there. And now, do we have that lined up with the front of the shoe? There we go. We're getting close. Okay, there it is. Now, how are we going to check this? Let's use the protractor, and we'll check and make sure that it's level so that way we don't get a dog leg in this. Now, this bent up this way, so this is going to have to rotate around this way so that way we get it bent in the right direction. I'm going to check this for 0. And I'm going to slam the roller home. and make sure that that cam is right up against the handle. See if I can get that. Okay. And we'll double check to make sure we got it at 0 to prevent the dog leg. And I'm going to look at it with the eye, and it looks pretty close. The roller's home. We want to bend 30 degrees. It's at 30 degrees. And we're going to hit bend. Should stop at 30. There, and we'll hit unload. And I'm going to relax the roller support off of this. And we can take the put it in unload. It's back in the home position. And then we'll take this out. And let's just check and see if it's 12 inches. And 1/8 inches. So it turned out pretty good. We got the stub up and we've got our offset. Now you're going to notice, look at our radius of our bend, where we had to put that 6.5 inches, we had to put that into the radius of the bend. And if you look at the conduit, it's a little bit deformed right there from the squeeze to where that put it in there. So that's probably about the most that we're going to be able to come back into the radius that much in order to get this offset. Anything you want, you're probably going to want to have 2 different bends together. And we bent the 2-inch with the standard pendant on the 855 Greenlee bender. Next, we're going to use the deluxe pendant and bend a 3-bench saddle.